I stood outside the school gymnasium, clutching a small bouquet of carnations, cheap ones from the supermarket near my apartment, but they were my grandson's favorite color. Purple. He told me once, when he was 4 and I was still allowed to take him to the park, "Grandma, purple is the color of magic." The door closed in my face 15 minutes ago. Not slammed. That would have been easy to hate. No, it was worse. It was gentle. Soft. As if I weren't even worth slamming on. My daughter-in-law's smile was tight as fishing wire, her voice smoother than any of her cream-colored cardigans. "Hi, Martha. I didn't know you were coming. It's just this is a parents-only event." I blinked. "I'm here for Caleb." "I understand," she said. She always says that. "But it's for parents. We really want to respect the school structure." Respect the school structure. As if a folding chair and a paper crown needed a contract. So I stood there. Alone. My son didn't even look up. He was too busy adjusting Caleb's costume. A knight. I'd helped him make it, cardboard shield and all, sprayed with silver paint in my tiny kitchen. I raised that boy. His first diaper. His first steps. The nightmares. The broken arm. The way he clung to my cardigan on the first day of school because his mother had already left. And now I was told, with a calm little smile, that this moment, this memory, wasn't mine to have. So I did what I had to do. I stayed. I sat on the bench outside the gym, surrounded by secondhand cigarette butts and yesterday's rain. I listened to the applause from inside, and when Caleb's name was called, I stood up, pressed my ear to the cool metal of the door, and imagined the way his eyes would light up. I whispered, "You're doing great, baby." I held the card I made for him, purple construction paper, 3 stickers, and my crooked handwriting that still trembles from arthritis. He made me one just like it last year. But this story doesn't start here. No, it started long before the door closed. It started when I first raised a child who would one day forget I had. My name is Martha Caraway, and I am 78 years old. I had one son, Peter, and for most of his childhood, I was everything. Not because I was trying to be. Not because I thought I could replace his father, who left when Peter was 6, but because I had to. Because when someone walks out and the rent's due and the dishes are piled up and the kid has a fever and there's no Tylenol, you don't get to pause. You just do. I worked 2 jobs. Clerked at a pharmacy during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. Peter learned how to heat soup at 7, how to check my back for bruises when I slipped on wet marble floors at 9, how to smile for both of us when I was too tired to fake it anymore. We were a team. But teams break. Especially when someone else shows up in a shinier jersey. Her name was Lacey. She came with polished nails and Pinterest lunches and 1,000 little comments that sounded like compliments unless you listened close. "She's so strong, Pete. I don't know how she did it all alone. She's so set in her ways. She just wants what's best, even when it's not what we need." I wasn't perfect. God knows I made mistakes. I hovered too much. I worried too loudly. I said no when I should have said maybe. But I loved him with everything I had. Still do. And for a while, I thought she did too. Until the space between us became habit. Until my phone calls were met with voicemails. Until every dinner invitation came with an apology and an excuse. I asked Peter once, "Am I doing something wrong?" He smiled. A sad little smile, the kind you give to someone you think doesn't quite get it. "No, Mom. You're just a lot sometimes." I was a lot. A lot of birthday cakes. A lot of hand-sewn Halloween costumes. A lot of scraped knees and soccer games and whispered prayers by his bedside. A lot of love. The night of Caleb's school play, I left the card on their car windshield. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't want to start something. That's the thing about dignity, you hold it tight when everything else falls apart. The next morning, I got a call. Not from Peter. From Caleb. He'd found the card. He'd asked who made it. He'd begged to call me. His voice was a balm. Innocent. Unfiltered. He told me the knight won a prize. That he'd saved the princess. That the sword worked, even though it bent a little. And then he said, "Why weren't you there, Grandma?" I didn't know what to say. So I lied. I had to fight my own dragon, sweetheart. He laughed. "Did you win?" "I think so. But the truth is, I didn't. Not that night. Not yet. Because this war, the one between mothers and daughters-in-law, between past and present, between what we give and what we're allowed to keep, it doesn't end with one battle. It takes something more. I spent the next week writing. Every day, after oatmeal, and before my afternoon walk. Not emails. Not complaints. Letters. One for Peter. one for Lacey, and one for Caleb to be opened when he turns 18. I told them everything. Not to guilt them, not even to ask for anything. Just to remember. Because sometimes, silence is too heavy. And dignity doesn't mean you vanish. It means you choose when to speak. And when I finally mailed those letters, I felt something lift. Not anger. Not sadness. Just truth. And truth is a kind of freedom. Even if no one says thank you. Even if the door stays closed. Even if your name isn't on the program. That Sunday, I stayed in bed longer than usual. No Sunday crossword. No early mass. Just the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the weight of memory pressing down on my chest like an old wool blanket. I thought I would cry after sending those letters. I thought it would bring closure, or release, or maybe just plain relief. But instead, I felt blank. As though I had finally said everything I ever needed to say, and now, all that was left was waiting. A week passed. Then two. No response. Peter didn't call. Lacey didn't even send a text. Caleb didn't mention anything the one time he FaceTimed with me. His little face, all teeth and freckles. It was just like every other call, short, sweet, and carefully supervised. I began to wonder if they even read the letters, or if they were buried somewhere beneath unopened mail and Amazon packages. It was the third week when something changed. I was coming home from the grocery store, carrying 2 bags eggs, coffee, and a small bag of butterscotch candies I didn't need, but always liked hand. There, on my doormat, was a box. Small, plain, no note. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the cardboard night shield. The same one I helped Caleb make. The silver paint still flaked at the edges, but in the center, drawn in crayon, was something new. A purple heart with my name scribbled inside it. To Grandma the Brave. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down right there on the floor. For the first time in years, I let myself cry the way I used to when Peter was small, silent. Deep sobs that seemed to come from someplace older than grief. The kind of cry that belongs to grandmothers and widows and women who keep too many things to themselves. He remembered. My baby's baby remembered. And for now, that was enough. 3 days later, Peter called. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound guilty either. He just sounded tired. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Got your letter." I waited. I didn't trust my voice just yet. I read it out loud, he continued. To Lacey. And then we sat there for a while. Not talking. He paused. Then, so softly I barely caught it. I forgot a lot of things. Important things. "It's easy to forget," I said, steadying myself. "No," he replied. "It shouldn't be." There was another pause, longer this time. Then, "I'm sorry." I had waited years to hear that. Decades, maybe. And yet when it finally came, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't want to throw it back in his face or ask him why it took so long. All I felt was a quiet, aching sort of love. The kind that knows what it costs to come home after too long. He cleared his throat. "Lacey's trying. I think she saw it as protecting Caleb. Or maybe just drawing boundaries. But I think we forgot the difference between healthy and cruel." "She's his mother," I said. "I understand that." "You're mine," he answered. I don't know how long we sat there on the phone. 2 grown people wrapped in old wounds and hesitant grace. But something settled between us that day. Not a return to how things were, but maybe a chance to build something new. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later. A real one, this time. Embossed. With my name written in Caleb's careful block letters. "Grandparents' Day, come celebrate with us." It was a small school event, nothing fancy. Just songs and cookies and paper crowns. But to me, it was a coronation. I wore my nicest blouse. Put on lipstick. And I brought a gift, nothing big. Just a book I used to read Peter when he was little, now wrapped in fresh paper for Caleb. As I walked through the doors of the school gym, the same ones that had shut me out before something loosened in my chest, I saw Peter waiting near the chairs, and when he saw me, he smiled. Not the forced kind. Not the apologetic one. Just a smile. Lacey stood next to him. She didn't look away this time. She even stepped forward. "Hi, Martha," she said. "I'm glad you came." I nodded. "Thank you for including me." For a moment, she seemed unsure. Then she reached out and touched my arm lightly, but with intention. "No," she said. "Thank you for not giving up." Caleb ran to me, golden hair bouncing, eyes wide with joy. "Grandma, you came. You really came." I knelt down and held him as tight as my old bones would allow. I wouldn't miss it for the world. And for the first time in years, I felt whole again. Not because the pain had vanished. Not because everything had been fixed. but because I remembered something that had gotten lost along the way. Sometimes, the fiercest kind of love is the one that waits outside closed doors and stays. That night, after the cupcakes and performances and messy glitter-covered crafts, Peter drove me home. The car was quiet, the way it used to be when he was a teenager when he didn't know what to say, and I knew better than to push. He pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. "I want to do better," he said. "Not just with Caleb. With you. With everything." I touched his hand. "You're already doing it." He nodded slowly. "You know, I used to think Lacey and I were starting something brand new. Our own little world. But I realize now we were standing on something someone else built. And I'm sorry we treated it like it didn't matter." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I whispered, "You were my whole world, Peter." He turned to me, eyes shining. "Still am. Always. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Lacey and I will ever be close. Or if I'll be invited to every birthday party or every milestone. Life doesn't tie up neatly. It's not a Hallmark movie. And people don't change overnight. But that's not the point. The point is I showed up. Even when I wasn't wanted. Even when the door closed. Even when no one clapped. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, showing up is the most radical act of love there is. The months that followed were slow, deliberate steps toward healing. Peter started calling more. Sometimes it was about Caleb's school, sometimes just to talk about the garden or ask for a recipe he remembered from childhood. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real, and that's what I needed. The realest moment, though, came quietly on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after Caleb turned 9. I had been at his birthday party invited, welcomed even. Lacey had reserved me a seat at the table next to Caleb, where I watched him blow out his candles, frosting on his nose, laughter bright enough to outshine the flame. And afterward, she actually handed me a plate and asked if I wanted to help serve the cake. That small act felt like peace. But the phone call on Tuesday was something else entirely. Peter's voice was hushed, almost timid. "Can I bring him over for a few hours?" I blinked. "You mean just the two of us?" "Yeah," he said. "He's been asking." When they pulled up, Caleb jumped out of the car before it had fully stopped. He carried something bulky under his arm, wrapped in an old pillowcase. "Surprise!" he shouted, running into my arms. Peter stood by the car, watching. His hands were in his pockets, his eyes unreadable. He gave me a short wave and called out, "Back in 2 hours." And just like that, it was just me and Caleb. My living room, filled with the scent of cinnamon tea and the soft creak of old floorboards. He unwrapped his package 3 board games, a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, and a small box of crayons. "Can we build a fort, Grandma?" We did, with couch cushions and old sheets, just like I used to do with Peter on rainy days. Inside that fort, under the soft glow of a flashlight, Caleb curled up beside me and said, "Daddy told me you used to be the bravest person in the world." My throat tightened. "He said that?" Caleb nodded. "He said you fought everything. Bad jobs, scary nights, even loneliness." I turned the flashlight off and lay beside him in the darkness. "I did fight," I whispered. "But the hardest part wasn't fighting. It was staying kind." Later that evening, Peter came inside instead of waiting in the car. He helped clean up, even stacked my dishes by the sink. We didn't talk much until he was about to leave. Then, just as he opened the door, he paused. "He doesn't know everything," he said, without looking at me. "Not yet. About his grandfather. About how hard it really was." "He doesn't need to," I replied. "He just needs to know he came from love." Peter turned, slowly. "Mom, how did you forgive me?" I looked at him, this man who used to fit in the crook of my elbow, whose forehead I'd kissed after every nightmare. "I didn't," I said softly. "Not at first." His eyes darkened with shame. I continued. "I remembered who you used to be. And I chose to believe that boy was still somewhere inside the man." He swallowed. "He is." "I know." That spring, Peter started visiting more. Sometimes with Caleb, sometimes just him. He helped me fix the broken fence in the backyard. We planted tomatoes, even though the soil was stubborn and rocky. I taught him how to knead dough again, just like I did when he was 12 and wanted to bake bread for his school project. One evening, while waiting for the dough to rise, he looked at me and said, "Lacey's pregnant." I smiled. "That's wonderful." "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" "Messing it up again. Forgetting the people who raised me. Forgetting who I am." I reached out and touched his hand. "Then remember." A few weeks later, Lacey called me. She didn't ask Peter to do it. She called me herself. Hi, Martha. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all. What's on your mind? There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear Caleb laughing in the background, some cartoon playing faintly. I've been reading your letter, she finally said. Over and over. I didn't want to, at first. I was angry, defensive. But now, she trailed off. But now, I prompted gently. I realize I made you feel small, she whispered. And that's not the kind of woman I want to be, especially not as a mother. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted her to have the space to say it all, whatever it was. I was jealous, she said, of how much Peter loves you, of the life you had with him. I felt like I had to protect my own space, my own version of motherhood. You still do, I said gently. But you never had to erase mine to do that. Her voice cracked. I know, and I'm sorry. I truly am. Forgiveness doesn't happen in a single breath, but it begins in one. And that day, we both took it. Caleb began spending weekends with me. Not always, but often enough that we started routines. Saturday pancakes, Sunday library trips, afternoons working on puzzles at the kitchen table. One day, after a long afternoon walk, he asked, Grandma, what happens when people get old? I smiled. They get wiser. But also slower, he said, wrinkling his nose. Yes, I laughed. Slower too. He thought about that. But do they stop being brave? I knelt down beside him. Never. The bravest people I know are old. Because they've seen the most. They've lost things, survived things, and still keep loving. He looked up at me, wide-eyed. Like you. I kissed the top of his head. Exactly like me. That summer, Peter and Lacey invited me on their family vacation. I nearly said no. Old habits, old hurts die hard. But I said yes. We went to a lake house. Nothing fancy, just a rented place with creaky steps and a swing set out back. Lacey cooked one night, Peter the next. And on the third night, I made my old chicken pot pie recipe, the one that fed us through winters when the heat barely worked. As we sat at the table, Caleb licking the last of the crust from his fork, Peter raised his glass. To Grandma, he said, who taught us how to love, even when we didn't know how to show it. Lacey reached out and took my hand. To the bravest heart in this house. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Tears are easy to hide when you're old. People assume they're from fatigue or memory. But mine weren't from sadness. They were from something deeper. Belonging. I never meant to be the villain. It's easy to paint me that way, I suppose. The young, polished wife. The gatekeeper. The woman who closed the door on a grandmother's face and smiled while doing it. But if you want the truth, you have to hear mine too. Because that day, when I looked Martha in the eyes and told her, this is a parents-only event, I wasn't being cruel. I was scared. Of her. Of what she represented. Of everything I thought I had to be, standing in the shadow of a woman who had already done it all on her own, and better than I ever could. When I first met Peter, I didn't understand how close he was to his mother. It wasn't just close in the way some boys are with their moms. Not as was different. It was quiet and fierce and invisible, like roots buried under a house. She wasn't always around. She didn't hover or meddle, but I felt her everywhere. In the way he folded the dish towel after cooking. In how he couldn't fall asleep without the white noise of a fan. In the way he said, everything's fine, with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. She raised him alone. She was his fortress, his history, his every why. And I was just starting. The first time I met Martha, I thought she was judging me. She brought over a pineapple, with a crust flakier than anything I could ever bake, and complimented my kitchen, my style, my nails. But her eyes kept drifting. To Peter, to how he held Caleb, to the way I moved. I was young, ambitious, a little selfish maybe. I wanted to do it my way. I didn't want another woman in the nursery, even if that woman had built the very man I married. So, slowly, I began to draw lines. At first they were subtle. She's tired, let's not bother her today. Or, I think Caleb's getting too used to your snacks, it's throwing off his meals. But later, it became clearer. No, we're spending the holidays with my parents this year. Or, the teacher said it's really best if just the parents attend. That last one, God, that one haunts me. I told her it was a school rule. It wasn't. I just didn't want to sit next to a woman who reminded me how much I still had to learn. But guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps in, through the cracks. It came when I saw the handmade shield on our doorstep. It came when Caleb whispered, "Grandma would have liked this," as he painted his craft purple. It came when I found Peter sitting quietly in the nursery one night, holding a letter, his thumb tracing her shaky signature like it was a prayer. "What did she say?" I asked, arms crossed, defensive by instinct. He didn't answer. He just looked up at me with the eyes of the boy she raised and said, "Do you ever wonder if we're building a family on top of a foundation we're pretending isn't there?" That was the night I read the letter myself. Twice. The first time I was too angry. I picked it apart. Every sentence felt like an accusation. Every story felt like a warning. You'll never be what I was. But the second time I cried. Because it wasn't about her. It was about all of us. About love and time and the cruel way women are taught to compete instead of carry each other. I started noticing the things I'd ignored. The way Peter smiled differently around her. The quiet way she folded Caleb's laundry when she visited. The way she never demanded, never reminded, never blamed. She just waited like love was something she could hold until we were ready to take it back. And one day, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding for years. What would it cost me to let her back in? My answer surprised me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't control. It was fear. Fear that if she came back in, I would become less. Less mother. Less wife. Less woman. But I was wrong. Letting her in didn't take anything away from me. It added. The first real moment of grace came that spring, during our family vacation. I invited her. It took me 3 days to draft the message. I deleted it twice. But in the end, I hit send. She accepted. And when she arrived, Peter hugged her in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding. Caleb shouted her name like it was Christmas morning. And me? I set the table. And I made room for her. One night, after Caleb had gone to bed and Peter had taken the car into town for firewood, I found her sitting alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. I brought her a mug of tea. We didn't speak for a while. Then she said softly, "You love them very much." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied. I just didn't know how to show it without losing parts of myself. She nodded. "I know that feeling." I looked at her, really looked. Her hair silver at the roots. Her fingers stiff. But her eyes? Still fierce. Still alive. "You were never the enemy," I said. Her eyes filled with something wet and warm, but she didn't let it fall. "And you were never the thief," she replied. We sat there, under the night sky, two women bound by the same man, the same child, the same ache to matter in a world that keeps trying to erase old things to make room for the new. In the months since, things haven't been perfect. There are still moments when we misstep, times when I speak too quickly or she withdraws too quietly. But now we notice. We recover. We try again. Peter laughs more. Caleb talks about his grandma like she's made of magic. And me? I've started seeing her not as a warning, but as a map. She shows me what kind of mother I could be, what kind of grandmother I might become, what kind of woman I still have the chance to grow into. I don't regret protecting my space. I regret not realizing sooner that it was big enough for both of us. Because motherhood isn't a throne. It's a circle. And love expands to fit who's brave enough to sit beside you. So yes, maybe once, I told her she didn't belong. But now I watch her hold my daughter, my second child, in her arms, rocking her gently while singing a lullaby I've never heard. And instead of feeling replaced, I feel held. By every woman who came before me. By every woman strong enough to stay. And that, I think, is the bravest love of all.